got to tell you, I think I accidentally held my website hostage. My entire website.
You had a hostage situation on Drive?
I basically did one of those mob things like, sure would be a shame if this website never came back. Oh, that'd be a real tragedy.
You did that?
So we've been working for a very long time, over 2 years on the new website. We recolored the entire archives. We remastered some pages. We redesigned the archives and the navigation system, the whole new look. But because at your suggestion, we wove Patreon into the site, there was a fair amount of testing to do. So we took it down for 7 to 10 days to just let it test with a key, 10 to 20 people, and then we were going to roll it out to the site. Anyway, I put up a little placeholder image that says new website coming soon. But hey, if you'd like to read ahead, you can join us over at patreon.com/drive, and that will, you'll get weeks ahead on the archive. In the 7 days that the website was down, the website was not there. There was nothing there.
Yeah.
I got 33 Patreon backers.
Holy
in
cats.
And honest to God, I was like, Beth, am I holding my website hostage by accident? Am I forcing people to join Patreon because it's like, oh, sure would be a shame if this pretty website never appeared unless you joined Patreon. Like, not my intent, but all of a sudden people came out of the woodwork, and 33 people in 1 week.
I think we found a new brilliant Patreon strategy. Extortion.
Guys, readers hate this one weird trick, and that's called extortion. Yes, you're going to love it.
Forget about scarcity. Scarcity is old news. We're going straight to extortion. and next stop, blackmail.
I basically use the ultimate in scarcity, which is you ain't getting nothing unless you pay up. That's what you're getting. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was bonkers to me that it worked completely accidentally. So now once a year, the Drive website's going to go down for improvements.
Oh,
so I can get 20
think
to
you've
30
got a
new.
plan on it now. And you can just say, oh yeah, annual site improvements, and then just watch them roll right in.
Oh, looks like I need to buy some extra, whole wheat bread this week. I need some extra money. Time to bring the website down. Oh,
whole wheat, the 12 grain bread. No more of this 11 grains for you.
But now, let's bring in the show. But I actually want to talk to you about this. So I'm just going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive, and Sheldon and co-director of the comics documentary Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And just a reminder that this show is going out live right now to our very special group over at patreon.com/comiclab. There is the special live Gab group, and you can join us every week. The show streams live on Tuesday mornings. And if by chance you happen to miss it for work, life, or whatever, it is archived every week. And so you can check out the archives of the live stream. We also have a running chat, and I'm waving to everybody in the chat right now. And Bradley, what do we got for the topic this week? I guess we got to finish up the topic of my website. That's
I'm
what we
not ready to leave that first topic because I've got a theory. I've got a question for you.
Okay.
So you've got, what did you say, 30 new Patreon backers ever since you put that sign up saying, the site is down for 5 days or 7 days.
Yep.
I would love it if you sent them each a one question questionnaire, or just sent them one question and say, was this the first time you found out I had a Patreon?
Well, I can already answer that, and here's why I know. Because if you remember, Brad, they're not a paid sponsor of the show, but I use Bonjoro.com with my Patreon. Yeah. So anytime somebody signs up, I send them a Bonjoro. By the way, I also send it anytime somebody makes a purchase on my site or buys original art or this or that. And what Bonjoros are is I turn around, I hit boop on my camera, I record a quick 30 to 60 second video saying thanks and welcome, and send it off into the ether. And so many people respond to the Bonjoros, first of all, with sort of a surprise delight, because who expects to get a video? And then also, so many of them said, I just didn't realize, or I didn't see, or I hadn't noticed the Patreon before, or I've been meaning to and hadn't done it, and this was a good call to action. So there was a lot of, I think, and you had mentioned this in passing on about something else, a lot of sort of banner blindness about the fact that Patreon existed for me. And the genuine question, this is good for all of us, actually, this is a good topic for the show, is how do you overcome clonking people over the head the fact that you have a Patreon versus experiencing what I clearly did, which was banner blindness for a percentage of my readership.
I've got ideas. I've got lots of ideas on this because I see this an awful lot. Number one, it's got to have an image. That Patreon outreach that you're doing has got to have an image. And if I remember the old Drive site right, you had a button. You had a button here or there. You had a couple things below the fold or below the comic. And then above the comic, you had a button. But the first thing I'm going to say, just to people listening in general that want to do better, have an image. It's got to be image based, not a link, not a text based thing. It's got to have an image there, and that image has to be compelling. Number two is that every couple months, change that image again to defeat what Dave was just talking about as banner blindness, when you just get so used to seeing it on the site or on outreach every time. Change that image so it's different. And number three, if you're like a lot of us, and we're talking old school site stuff here, and you repurpose that banner ad spot along the top of your site, or if you still have something there that recalls a banner ad, remember, or if you're still, for some reason, using banner ads, we've got to not discount that either. There's still people using banner ads for whatever reason.
And enjoying that extra $1.39 that comes in every month, that
for whatever reason. But remember, even if that site has no value to you from advertising anymore, it still has value. It doesn't have advertising value, but it still has value. And you should absolutely be putting your own house ads up there. And some of those house ads could be for books. It could be this, but it could be for that. And it absolutely, you should be having a running rotation of Patreon banner ads.
Yeah, and that's I think that's where I went wrong, is that I did have a variety of sort of house ads for Patreon, but here's a couple of things that I think I did wrong. One is I would append them to the bottom of the image of the comic itself, thinking that that same image goes out on my RSS feed. It goes out on Twitter. It goes out on the website. It goes out on my MailChimp email mailings, right? So that my thought was it goes everywhere. It goes with the comic. The problem there is it's not clickable, and that is a problem right there. The second one is I think, if I'm being honest about it, we kept in rotation the same three images maybe for a year and a half, 2 years. And that's absolutely banner blindness at that point, So yes, I agree with you. You do a very good job, Brad, on your sites of swapping out entire banner carousels on a almost hourly basis. I don't know how you do it from a human level. It's just time to brush my teeth and change my ad carousel again. Dinner time to change my ad carousel again.
It's just a part of my standard operating procedure at this point. When I do a new commission, when I've got a new After Dark page or something like that, as I'm processing it for vertical scroll and this use and that use, I'm also taking a piece and turning it into a slider to go at the top of my site. I'm taking a crop, and I'm going to plan on using that for social media. I have these things that I call Best of the Month, which is kind of like a 3x3 image of a total of 9, looks like kind of a tic-tac-toe board. And there's an image inside each square. I do that, and I post it near the end of the month. Here's a sampling of everything my Patreon backers got. I just do all of that while I'm sitting there. I've got it open. I might as well do it. Pop, 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 pop. If you go to my site, I'm a big fan of that slider that goes across the top, because it gives you a different image every time, and it just slides through. They're all clickable. You do not need to do it as big as I've done it. Many times I go to my site and I'm like, nah, you went a little big there, didn't you, Honcho? You got a little excited, didn't you, pal? You might want to throttle yours back from mine. But the other thing I want to just really quick, as long as we're talking about this, MailChimp, as you're setting up your MailChimp template, you can get a clickable thing in there. You can put it right at the top. It'll be the same thing until you change it. But I've got a little a square Patreon ad at the top of the MailChimp vertical scroll that goes out that says, hey, join us on Patreon. It's got an image and it's clickable. You can put a link in there. So MailChimp, you can actually address that. I do agree. I think the clickability thing is the big issue there. And banner blindness, but do take that into MailChimp, and you can get some good results.
Well, not to belabor the idea of the new website, but I do want to talk for a second, mainly to thank you as a friend, because you and others, but mainly you, from many years ago, were like, look, you've got to make your website mobile friendly. And I was kind of doing the hand waving. So now the site is mobile friendly, which, by the way, involves slicing up the 500 pages of Drive and the 200 pages of Tales of the Drive.
Yeah.
And there's no algorithmic or automated way to do that. It has to be done with an artist's eye. It has to be done by hand.
Yeah.
And so we had to turn 700 images into somewhere between 3,500 to 4,200 images. We're still not done. It just takes a long time. And this is on top of the 2 years that we've spent recoloring the archives. Anyway, long story short, it's been an effort, but it's going to be worth it because you have been, I think, blazing a trail in terms of incorporating the Patreon API into your website. And all of the new things, the new features on my site that I'm most excited to see are thanks to you. I really want to thank you for that.
Wow.
Because we now have it where if you want to read the comics early, you can do it on the website if you're logged in through Patreon. If you want to read the 200 plus pages of Tales of the Drive, you can read it with your Patreon login.
Nice.
If you want to have all these special pages, if you want to do the communication and the conversation in the community, that's all there too. What I'm getting at is it's really neat that Patreon's API can now be rolled into a website so that all the main comic is always free to read, but once you're hooked, once you like it, you can unlock all this extra stuff with your Patreon login, and it's right there on the site. And I have you to thank for that because I would not have known to do it unless you had done it first.
Thank you. Well, number one, I appreciate that. And I'm loving the way this new site is turning out. You want to hear a story about a trailblazer real quick, as long as we're talking about what a trailblazer I am? The Patreon login on the main EvilInk site hasn't been working for weeks. And when I say weeks, I mean months, but I won't say months out loud. But I'll tell you it's weeks. It's probably been months. And I've been struggling to figure out why. You can get to EvilInk After Dark. You can get to the commissions subpage. But the actual Patreon login on the EvilInk site has not been working. And I've been stymied on what to do about it. I solved it last week. Somewhere on one of those little forms that you've got to do, one of those web forms, I had that the redirect was evilink.com. It needed to be www.evilink.com.
Oh, those tiny little errors will. It's one of the reasons why I never could go into programming is because the syntactically perfect life that you have to live without driving yourself bonkers is, listen, it's like, did you ever turn in copy and back when you worked professionally and the proofreader would suddenly bleed red all over it and you're like, God, I did not notice any of that until you proofed that. That's how I feel about anytime I have to even just the smallest smidge of coding on anything. I'm like, well, I'll go with God code because I know I did you wrong. That's there you go.
Do you know that's how I caught it? Because somebody sent me, Brian actually from Tuchechi, because I said, hey, give me some thoughts. I don't know what he says. Well, it should be this. And so I literally copy and pasted the URL that he sent me. And when I pasted it in, I noticed that it got longer. And so I hit undo and I'm like, it can't be longer. It's the exact same thing. I pasted again. It got longer. I'm going over letter by letter. I can't see it. I'm literally blind to it. So finally, I'm just like, okay, I'm going to paste it and hit the update button. Update, all of a sudden it's working. And I go back. Finally, I see, okay, the difference was www. I'm a much better cartoonist than I am a coder.
Yeah, no, but anyway, I'm excited for this next phase for Drive because I think it is going to be interesting to see, first of all, there's no way that old Dave could have planned ahead for this, but having an archive that is far more searchable and that can grow in its abilities, like we have the abilities now to add transcripts and that sort of stuff, although it's going to take forever. But that ability to be able to navigate in multiple ways, depending on users' preference, is going to be so much better compared to the way it was, which was not great. So anyway, it's so fun to have a new site. But I have to say, for everyone who approaches a web cartoonist and said, like, why don't you redo the site? Why don't you add these features? just know that sometimes the smallest request can take months to incorporate because there's a lot of background work on that sometimes. But that's why we always say start simple with when you're first starting out, start with maybe social media, start with one of those free Google sites that they can do if you want to do there. Maybe start with a Tapas or a Webtoons, and then as you build your site, because it's not the easiest first step to get a fully functional website going.
Yeah. Hey, as long as we're talking about website stuff, Dave, I've got a question that's just going to dovetail beautifully. This one comes in from one of our Patreon backers, Beverly Toole, who says, is it better to have a reader who goes to your website.com to instantly see the current comic page? I find that I have a big issue with the landing on the most recent page as a new reader for long-form comics. On my page, I laid it out where you are greeted with a piece of art and the options of new reader, which takes you to the first page, current reader, which takes you to the newest page, and a link to archives arranged by date. I try to limit the number of clicks, but I hate hitting a spoiler unawares. So Dave, let's talk about that landing page. We've said on the show multiple times, if you're doing webcomics the way we did them in 2005, you're probably making some mistakes. And that issue she's talking about is an early webcomics website. You went to the website, you saw the most recent page. She's saying, hey, I don't like that so much because I feel like it's spoilers. What advice do we have to give to Beverly?
Well, I agree with you that you don't want to do it the way we did it 15 years ago. I grant you that. But if I am a new reader to a story, and I always default to Star Wars, but let's start to Star Wars. And the page of the Star Wars webcomic is Luke, I am your father, right? But I'm new to it. I've never read this webcomic called Star Wars before. And I click on it and I see this man in black saying to this young boy who's missing an arm, Luke, I am your father, right? Here's my immediate takeaways. I don't know that's a spoiler because I don't know the story. I don't know who these two characters are. I don't know what's going on. But what probably is enticing me is the art's probably enticing me. Yep. I probably immediately know that it's sci-fi based on this man in this weird black outfit. And I like sci-fi, so I'm going to click in. What I'm getting at is, I think the concern for spoilers are overplayed, given that no one knows the story yet, you know? Yeah. And if you do have one of those photographic memories that like, no, I can't forget it once I've seen it, that's not the average reader. I think the average reader going back 100 pages, 200 pages, they'll forget what they saw by the time they start in on these characters that they're slowly coming to know and to learn and to love. So I personally wouldn't worry about spoilers. How about you, Brad?
I'm not all choked up about spoilers. I got to be honest with you. I'm much more concerned with making that page such that it's going to grab that person in the moment and will make them want to read it more. Yeah. I'm much more focused on that. But having said that, I do like the idea of a landing page. Everything that Bev said that she's set up on her site sounds great to me, right? A new reader's link, link to the current page, a link to archives by date. I'm applauding all of that. It sounds great. Here's a couple thoughts to share with you, though. You can have your cake and eat it too. In other words, if you want, like Dave is saying, hey, I like having the most recent page up on my website when people come there. You can do that. You can also build a separate landing page that is specifically meant for new readers to come in and give them a quick overview, consider it an onboarding procedure, right? You're getting them everything they need to know to become a new reader. You can set that separate landing page up and use that URL when you're out on social media promoting. Hey, my name is Beverly. I'm doing this comics, really cool, blah, blah, blah. Check it out. You use your landing page link. Now you're sending it over to a place where they're going to get a little synopsis. They're going to get the first chapter. They might get any number of entry points, right? First chapter, page 1 of chapter 2, yada, yada, yada. You can set up that landing page that's specifically meant to indoctrinate new readers and use that in special circumstances and still have that most recent page on the main website if you want. And after all, you have a great degree of control over where you're sending those people to because you're the one most likely in many cases who's going to be promoting and you're the one posting the link.
So in this case, Brad, what you're describing is you're at a show or you're doing social media or you're publicizing and you're sharing a URL like yourtitle.com.
Yeah.
And that's the landing page. But for any frequent user, it would be yourtitle.com/comic. Is that what it is? Or something like that?
Or you could do it the exact opposite way too. You could have it exactly the opposite of what you just described, depending on what you specifically want for your site.
Right. I mean, so a couple people that do that are, and granted, their work has gotten so multifaceted that it's very hard for them to do it. But Penny Arcade sort of has had a landing page for 15 years, and that you always started with, what was it, Jerry's blog, and then went to Mike's comic. So that was one way of doing it. Mike Norton's Battle Pug has a landing page. Mike Norton, who's I think is a brilliant visual artist, his Battle Pug has a landing page, and I thought he's one of the few that I know that does a distinctive, hey, you're new here, here's the basic idea, here's the elevator pitch, now click into the comic. And I will be honest, but again, it's mirror marketing. I don't really like that. If I'm going to go to a webcomic, I want to see the webcomic right away. I know enough about comics that I can make a snap decision if I even want to look further, just based on the look of it. The look of it alone will bring me in or kick me out. So I kind of want it. It's like, give me the Costco sampler. I'll figure it out later when I buy the 40-pack of sausages, that kind of thing. So that's just me. But yes, I take your point that for people that are worried about spoilers or worried about presenting their best foot forward, perhaps, if that's the way you want to say it, then a landing page could work. I do think, though, that if you're trying with every page to make that your best foot forward, it both improves the flow of the story, improves your art and your writing, because you're always trying to catch the eye of the new reader. That has advantages too, versus saying, new readers won't get this, but that's fine because it'll be behind this landing page. You know what I mean? They'll have to go to that first. Whereas there's something to the writing of, no matter what page someone flipped to in the book, if it caught their eye, that's an advantage, And so writing and drawing towards that goal, I think, has an advantage.
Absolutely. And I think depending on who you are as an artist or who you are as a creator, you could probably make a really strong argument for this either way. And I think the one thing that I really want to communicate is that this is one of those things that you could fine tune to your own personal way of doing comics.
Absolutely.
And make it work. You can make it work. Do check out the Drive Comic site at drivecomic.com, because one of the things you do that I think is excellent with the new site is give lots of navigation opportunities, right? With little thumbnails of the different pages and so forth. You make it very much easier than it used to be, and easier than it is on my site at this point to navigate those pages. I think you could make a strong argument. Landing page first, always. It's the way it's got to be. And you could make a strong argument. It's got to be the most recent page, and then get them into the rest. You could make an argument either way. True. As long as you're doing what Dave's doing and giving them lots and lots of navigation opportunities. Give them lots of choices. Give them lots of places to go once you've got their attention, whether you got their attention with the landing page or with the most recent page. Give them places to go after that. Give them ways to navigate your site, and I think you're going to come out on top.
Well, and I will say, while you mention that, every new site has its problems, and I already know like the faults this website has, which is fine. But the one thing that it does really well, Brad, is that navigation, because in a way that I don't think I've seen before, if for folks that get the chance, click into a page called Full Archives, and it'll show the Act 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the, what it has though now is 200 by 200 pixel thumbnails of every page in the story.
Yes.
And so for folks that get deployed, or for folks that come home from college, or for folks that have switched jobs or moved country or moved state, and they're starting back in on their web reading, they can visually see, well, I know I saw this space battle, or I know I didn't see these characters, so now I know where to go. And anyway, I just think that's a much better way to navigate. It's very pleasant, frankly, visually. But to your point, now with Drive, you can navigate by clicking the comic image itself, brings you forward, by clicking the arrows, brings you forward and back, and the thumbnails, which is kind of a new innovation that I really like.
And if you're under the age of 30 and you're right now pulling your hair out because these two old geezers are talking about websites, listen, this is what you need eventually when you're transitioning into Pro-Am or transitioning from Pro-Am to Pro. At some point, you really are going to need a website. And I know just from talking to my college students that when we start talking websites, they get very, their eyes glaze over because their experience on the web has not meant any of this stuff.
No.
Trust me when I tell you that not only has websites never gone away, as social media starts to decline, and I think we're going to start to see it over the next 10 years, that social media, people are going to get just bored and disgusted with it. Websites have never gone away. And I think one of my predictions is that websites are going to become more important as the internet comes around on that cycle again. Everything old is going to be new again. You need to think about websites for this very reason.
Well, and remember that was what social media giveth with one hand, it taketh away sometimes more with the other hand. And so, yes, people love the walled gardens of social media, but it doesn't necessarily help the artist. And I mean, all you need to do, by the way, it's also boom and bust. So look at Snapchat's quarterly filings today. Snap is the parent company. Man, they took it on the teeth. And that's maybe Instagram in the not too distant future and perhaps TikTok. Like what I'm saying is the boom that they're experiencing now, 5 to 6 years from now. And so, yes, you can build up hundreds of thousands of users on any one of these social media platforms, but only by having the website do you really start to hold on to them as readers and frankly own them as readers in a way that social media does not give you. So,
and that's where you cultivate.
I know you can have what's it? Yeah,
that's where you cultivate engaged readers.
Yeah, so absolutely, you can build a huge audience on Instagram of hundreds of thousands of people. It's hard to move them to do anything, but on my website, on my mailing list, I can motivate people comparatively easy to social media.
As you just found out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yes, is it a smaller group that uses the website? Absolutely, I would grant that. But it's a more dedicated user, and it's a user that I can help steer towards purchases of Kickstarters, of existing books, of Patreon. Anyway, all that being said, we're big fans of continuing a website, even in a world of social media, because frankly, I think we're finding social media is a kind of an unfair parent that is not feeding us dinner at night.
Yeah. And remember, this is what we tell you on the show every time. You don't measure your audience by the people, you measure it by the passion.
And the pesos, if we want to keep the P's. You don't.
Yes, those count too. Those definitely count. For me, it's pennies, but.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
So, Brad, now is the time of the show when we do updates, and I've got 2 updates for the show. Topics we've talked about in the past that we want to bring back to give people new information on. And the first one I want to talk about is San Diego Comic-Con, which is happening mid to late July this summer. It is the first time that it is in person in, I guess, 3 years, if I'm doing my math right. And Dave Kellett will be there and will be exhibiting at booth 1228. So come on by. But
do you have your same spot on the show floor?
Same spot on the show floor.
Good,
I actually thought, I actually have a fair amount of updates that I want to talk to you about.
Let's talk about updates.
The first one is San Diego Comic-Con. For those that don't know, it is the most set in stone show in all of comics, in the sense that once you get a booth, You do not leave. So it's like that Jerry Seinfeld joke about like trying to find parking in New York is that everybody parked in 1975 and no one's moved. That's what it is for San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah.
No one has moved in decades because once you get a spot, you never leave because then you can't get back in. So, Brad, this is fascinating to me. They released the map to exhibitors. It's not public yet, but they released it to exhibitors. And for the first time in maybe, 20 years, there is a lot different. And also there's booths open, which I was like, what? So for the first time I was like, do I buy more booth space? Do I grow it? And honestly, Beth, my wonderful assistant, like for me, it was an ego move. I was like, do I buy more booth space?
Yeah.
And Beth's like, what are you doing? We have a corner booth. It's 20 linear feet. We don't need more space. What are you doing? Like, no, you're not spending an extra $3,000 to get more booth space. And I was like, you're right. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to do it. But anyway, it was fascinating to me that the show floor is very different this year, but just based on who's exhibiting where. And secondly, that there's availability in booths, which is bonkers.
Wow.
I think that is both due to a billion reasons around COVID. But anyway, fascinating. But the updates that I wanted to give everyone for the show is, number one, San Diego Comic-Con announced that they're going to be a fully mass show that's based on the San Diego health, what would you call it? Commissioner health, the person that runs health in San Diego, and the show itself. And also, and I don't quite understand how this is related, but San Diego is not putting carpeting down, as far as I can tell, this Comic-Con, which always, frankly, made Comic-Con a classier show for those that go to conventions and for any kind of sales show. If you've ever been to a Comic-Con that has the pure cement floor, it a little bit feels like a flea market, but when you go to Comic-Con, they have this really classy carpet that kind of dresses up the place, frankly. And this year, I guess because this is purely a guess, maybe they're going to clean the floors every night for COVID. I don't know. I really can't figure out a reason why they wouldn't put the carpet down.
It's going to make it noisier too.
It is going to make it noisier.
Right? Because as soon as you take that carpet up and you've got the noise bouncing off that cement floor, it's going to get because every wizard show you've ever gone to has been echoey and noisy for exactly that reason.
Yeah. So it's going to feel less classier. It's going to be a little bit noisier, probably a lot noisier. In the mornings, it's going to be just an ounce colder than it normally is when they're blasting the AC. And then the other knock-on effect is because the carpets aren't down, another really classy thing that San Diego Comic-Con does is they normally drop electrical lines to every booth, which if you've ever been to a wizard show or New York Comic-Con, you have to pay through the roof for electrical. San Diego offered it free with the booth. But this year, apparently for most, if not all booths, no electrical this year because no carpeting to hide the wires under. So very different show planning for everyone that's going to be exhibiting. Note that you might want to bring your own carpet for your booth and probably padding. If you're like Dave Kellett, I buy those little squares that you can put together.
Makes a big difference.
Makes a big difference on your knees and on your ankles over 5 days of standing, and a little bit of carpeting for the booth. And just keep in mind, you're going to need to bring more batteries. So that's the updates for San Diego Comic-Con.
Yes.
Because it's very different layout for the show. Not layout, but very different locations of everyone for the show. And so I'm excited to do it just because it's going to be so different. It'll be like the year that they added that 400,000 square feet of space in 2001 or 2002, Brad.
I remember that. Yeah.
So anyway, that's the big update for San Diego Comic-Con.
Very good. Do you have an update for comic shops meanwhile?
Yes, I do.
As long as we're doing updates, I see on the list here, you've got something interesting to share on comic shops.
Well, I basically wanted to admit, because where possible, I want to admit the humility of where Brad and I go wrong. And this is one where I think I genuinely went wrong in that I predicted that the pandemic would really be the nail in the coffin for print and specifically for comic shops. And that has proven to be not only wrong, but woefully wrong in the sense that print not only survived, they are thriving during the pandemic. And that's true with a lot of media that could be consumed by itself. And I just didn't put that together, that Netflix would have done amazing. Disney Plus would have done amazing. Granted, they're now suffering because people are going back out in the world, but print also did amazing. And some titles did bonkers. And so some comic shops were flourishing. Now, I will hold to my long-term prognosis that comic shops and print and floppies in particular are in for trouble. Newspapers are continuing to be in trouble, but I will admit I was wrong that they were going to suffer during the pandemic. A lot of them did really, really well.
I got to be honest with you. I agreed with your prognosis. I thought for sure that after the pandemic, and technically, not even technically, we're still in it. It's kind of silly
we're
to
still
pretend
in it,
like we're out of it. But
no,
I would have thought in the third year of the pandemic that comic shops would be completely obliterated. And it's a feather to their cap that they found ways to make this work and to make their business survive and, like you said, thrive. So it's a great story. I agree. I think it still ends in the same place, but I'm glad to see that they've made it through.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you and I, as romantics about comics, want comic shops to exist. I want there to be, even though I only go once a year or twice a year, I would love to be able to walk into a comic shop in 2030 or 2040 and look through and browse comics. I just don't know that that's going to exist.
Yeah.
Given the struggles with Diamond, given the struggles with local shops and stock and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I am pleasantly surprised to see that they not only did well during the pandemic, many of them thrived in ways they hadn't pre-pandemic. So anyway, just an update for everyone on that. But let's jump back into the questions, Brad. So we've got one coming in over at patreon.com/ComicLab from Mark Ashworth that I'll throw at you, Brad. And Mark writes, in the Patreon creator census for 2022, it's stated that, quote, creators who promote daily earn 75% more, and creators who promote once a week earn 31% more. End quote. So even with this finding, it's still a bad idea, though, to post more often than you have something genuinely frequent, consistent, and significant to post, right? So Brad, that's the question for you. So given the thought that people that really infrequently post are making less money than those that post 3 times a week and way less money than those that post daily, what do you do, Brad, if you don't have frequent, consistent, significant updates to do on Patreon?
We've got to scale. We've got to hold up just a minute here because we've got to define our terms because we slipped into an ambiguous term at the end. It says, even with this finding, it's still a bad idea to post more often. Now, what is a post? Are we talking about a Patreon post or a social media post? Because now we're talking about 2 completely different things.
I think I read it as a Patreon post is what I read it as.
So in that regard, I'm going to have a few. That's going to change my answer a little bit because in basically, if you're talking about a social media post, again, what social media rewards is consistency and frequency, not so much creativity, but frequency and consistency. And what Patreon is saying in that passage is that when you promote more with social media posts, you get more response to your Patreon. In other words, the more you're out there on social media talking about it, the more you're getting responses to it. Now, if we're not going to talk about social media posts, and instead we're going to talk about Patreon posts about which we're going to be talking about on social media, I'm going to say this. Yes, it is not a good idea to post more often than you've got something frequent, consistent, and significant. I agree with that. I want you to hold up, though, a little bit, because I've seen this happen many, many times when I'm consulting with people. What you think is consistent and significant and what your readers may think is significant can often be 2 different things. In other words, for me, a time-lapse video of me drawing a comic is not significant. It doesn't have a lot of worth to me because I've seen me draw 100 times. But you have to realize that what we do as artists is magic to other people. And if you want to prove it to yourself, just take a sketchbook into the park and start drawing and watch the number of people that either overtly or covertly are watching what you're doing. Right. You can easily draw a crowd sitting there drawing. People do this at
coffee
comic
shops.
Conventions.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can, because it's magic. So I think a time-lapse video is the most boring thing in the world. My Patreon backers appreciate it. Okay. Same thing with sketches. I feel silly posting a sketch of unfinished art to my Patreon backers. But to them, it's behind the scenes stuff that nobody else gets. Remember, Patreon deals in scarcity.
Right.
that's behind the scenes stuff that nobody else gets to see. That's something that increases value to their monthly Patreon pledge. And what you're trying to do is give them as much value as you can so they stick around, so they're not even tempted to leave. So yes, you do have to think about frequent, consistent, and significant, but you have to have your business hat on. You have to have your marketing hat on, not your mirror marketing, but your marketing hat on when you're making these decisions. And again, go back to that Pro Tips episode when I shared 15 things to post on Patreon when you don't know what to post on Patreon. You have a lot more options than you think. And at the end of the day, post that and see what your Patreon backers have to say. That's the final audience. That's the final judge. They'll tell you if it's significant. What do you think, Dave Kellett?
No, I think that's 100% true. And again, I would reinforce what Brad just said. Go back and re-listen to the episode that talks about 15 things to post when you don't have anything to post.
Yeah.
Because so much of what we do, like Brad said, is miraculous. We are producing something out of nothing. So to the average person, that's like me watching a 3 or 4 group, a jazz band, suddenly out of nowhere find something magical. And for me, music is, I do not understand it. It is magical. It feels like a superhuman ability. I do not understand how a jazz band can suddenly click together and have an entirely new song. That always blows me away whenever I'm in a jazz club and that happens. Anyway, so for art, most people, what we do is like that. They're like, I don't know how you do it. You started with there's nothing, and there's pencils, and then there's inks, and then there's colors, and then there's a whole finished drawing. So remember that there's a million different ways that you could slice up your process, whether it be static photos or a video, or like Brad said, a time lapse or anything like that, or even just showing the layers of your art once it's done. That itself would take you seconds to isolate out the layers and say, here's the line art, here's the color by itself, here's the line art and the color, here's the line art and the color and the texture over it, all that, whatever it is.
You can do that in a video, for crying out loud.
It would be amazing to most people. So there's that. But I want to take a bigger, broader step back to talk about this difference between people that post once a day, people that post 3 times a day, and clearly the implication is people that don't post at all or post very rarely are making 75% to 30% less, right?
And you're saying now posting on social media or posting on Patreon?
On Patreon. Well, I don't know why you keep confusing social media.
You think there's people posting 3 times a day on Patreon?
No, 3 times a week, he said.
Okay. I heard you wrong. That's my bad.
Okay. So anyway, so the way I see this from a broad strokes picture is the people that are posting once a week, once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks, those are people that have structured a support-based Patreon, not an extras Patreon. And I say that because I have 3 Patreons. I have one for ComicLab with Brad Geiger. I have one with Drive, which has a lot of sneak peeks, exclusives, early reads, fan interaction, art giveaways. I have that one for Drive. And then I have Sheldon, which is admittedly a support-based Patreon. Not much goes on there. I kind of rarely ever post there. And so I can tell you the difference is, with Drive, with ComicLab, people are getting extras. They're getting behind the scenes. They're getting interactions with the creators. And so those posts make a difference because there's effort behind them. With Sheldon, people can feel that there's no effort behind that Patreon comparatively. So of course, there's going to be less people sticking around. And that translates to 30% less income or 75% less income based on so what I'm getting at is here, the big picture takeaway is not just, what do I post today? It's, are you trying to put in effort? Then I can guarantee you it's already making a difference. If you're doing like I'm doing with Sheldon, which is more of a support-based Patreon, I can tell you that it's going to make less money and you're going to have more attrition. Brad, thoughts on that?
There's so many thoughts. A few months ago, Patreon had a webinar that they had 3 or 4 people that were doing Patreon campaigns, and it was about how to improve your Patreon approach. And I, of course, signed up because I love to hear what these folks have to say. And this one guy looked earnestly into the camera and said, "I only post once a month because I don't like to spam my Patreon backers." And I started erupting. I started pulling my hair out of my scalp. Spam your Patreon backers. I started screaming in my studio, you cannot spam your Patreon backers. These people love you. If I post 30 times a month, they want to hear 31 times. Exactly. And that's my biggest problem with Patreon in their educational outreach is that they don't explain the difference between a support-based Patreon and an exclusive rewards-based Patreon. What this guy was talking about was a support-based Patreon. He had monster numbers. He could rely on 0.5% of them signing up for Patreon and make great income. And something like that, you can get away with posting once a month. Absolutely. But then when he shares that information about quote unquote spamming your Patreon backers, and if I'm a young creator who's trying to do exclusive rewards, if I take that to heart, I get terrible business advice that's going to keep me from my full potential for months and months and months, maybe years, until I figure it out for myself. You cannot spam your Patreon backers. And that's kind of what you're talking about, understanding the difference between what you're doing. Now, I say post as often as you can. And again, that's the only reason I came up with a list of 15 things to post. Now, does that mean that your Patreon can be all filler and no killer? No, you got to also
killer.
You got to bring the killer.
Glenn Ross over here. What is this? All filler, no killer.
You got to bring the killer. I can only get away with so many not safe for work sketches. They want to see those not safe for work commissions, right? I can only get away with so many time lapse. They want to see Evil Inc. the comic, right? I can't have it all filler. You've got to bring the good stuff and make that the bigger part. But if that helps you, those 15 things helps you to fill it out and keep that what I call a steady heartbeat of a content to your Patreon backers, that's what that's best used for.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to do with the big strokes look at this is that the very fact that Mark is asking this question means that he's giving attention to his Patreon. Yeah. And what I mean by putting the focus there is that it's kind of like the parenting advice that a lot of people give when they're a new parent and they're like, I don't want to mess my kid up. I don't want them to inherit my problems or my hiccups, or I want them to do good in this world. And the common advice, the best advice that most existing parents can give to new parents is, if you love them, you almost can't mess up. Yes. Because through hiccups, through good times and bad, if you love them and you give them support and you teach them generosity and kindness, what the wrinkles will work themselves out. You know what I mean? Like, love is the central focus of parenting, and from then all good things flow. And so with Patreon, attention, if you get what I'm getting at, is rather than it being a support-based Patreon, just giving your Patreon attention, things will work itself out. You'll find things to post because you want it to be a good, a satisfying, consistent, a frequent update system. And so much like parenting with love, with Patreon, it's attention. Just by the very fact that you want to give it attention, you will figure it out. That's what I was getting at.
Because as you pay attention, you're also going to be paying attention to their responses, to how they're responding. Yes, absolutely. And you're going to find the stuff that works for your audience that maybe I didn't even mention, or that Dave didn't even mention. You're going to find the stuff that works for your audience because you're going to be paying that attention. You know, that's where all of this comes down to.
And that's why I was saying it's very much like parenting, because if you love your children, you'll course correct as you go, and you'll figure out, okay, they respond well to this or they don't do well to that, and that kind of thing. And so much like that with a Patreon, you'll course correct to your audience and what their needs are and what they're reacting to. And it will work out with time. But again, broad strokes, that's a big thing. But for specifics, I would re-listen to Brad's post about 15 things to post on Patreon when you don't have things to post on Patreon.
Absolutely. So, Dave, I've got another question for you if you're ready for this one. And this is a unique one. This gets into the heart behind cartooning kind of issue. This one comes in, starts out by saying, hey, guys, love the show. Your laughter has been an important part of my morning for the last several months, and it really helped me with how I think about my work. So thank you for that. So my dad, he says, my dad has always dreamed of writing a book or selling T-shirts or making a board game or getting an invention in front of the right person. He has all of these ideas. And recently, his health has forced him into what seems like an early retirement. His mobility has been affected, but he wants to use his newfound time to build his business. My parents bought a bunch of neat toys like T-shirt presses, vinyl cutters, and all kinds of other stuff. I think my dad is kind of in a grieving process for the dreams he never started. And he wants to make something of himself now, and he's scrambling to build some sort of legacy. Maybe having something to help to work on will help him get out of a dark place. Our relationship isn't great. and part of me wants to help him. But experience has told me that that's not going to go well. I just wondered if you had any advice to help him through this transition, or maybe something that might help someone else in a similar situation. So Dave, I've got Dad on my mind.
Oh, yeah.
Dave, how do you help a guy who wants to help his dad?
The first thing we do is we acknowledge that you have a good heart for wanting to do this for your dad.
Yes.
Especially Brad always says the questions reveal themselves about how people are feeling and how they're coming at something. And it's clear that the relationship has had stumbles in the past or hiccups or, rocky road.
Yeah.
And the fact that you still want to help your dad through what is clearly a tricky time, it speaks very, very well of your heart, and you are a good person for doing it. Now, to the answer as to what you do or how to do it, this is trickier because it's very hard with an adult, especially with an adult who's your senior, especially with an adult who's a senior who's also your parent, to tell them what to do or to guide them, in the sense that an adult should and usually would figure it out on their own and guide themselves to the goal that they want to get to. It is, in a sense, what I'm reading through with the lines on your question is, help me fix my dad's inability to stick with a project, and help me help my dad find a spark in cartooning that could carry him through the rest of his life and make him feel like his creative outlet was satisfied. Yeah. That's a really, really, really tricky thing for any outside party that's not the person to do for them. My wife and I always have a saying when we're talking about artist friends who are so talented but can't seem to find the motivation. We stumbled upon a phrase that we can't want it for them. We can't force them to do the XYZ that they need to do to chase their art. If someone's not motivated to find the motivation in their own life, in their own heart, in their own goals, to do the steps that are needed to even get started, you can't want it for them. You can help, you can nudge them, but I don't think you can want it for them. And that's what makes this so hard.
And when it comes to, in fact, I just posted a video on motivation this morning on Twitter and my different social medias, where I said, I can't tell you how to get motivated. And quite frankly, I don't say it outright, but I'll say it to you folks. Anybody that tells you that they can tell you how to get motivated is probably selling you snake oil, right? Because motivation is more complicated than that. Even vanilla ice cream motivation is complicated. Now you take somebody who might have a neurological difference or a neurological divergency, right?
Right.
Motivation for that person is going to be different. It's going to be, right? Yeah. Take somebody who's dealing with anxiety and might have ways of putting things off. They're avoiding things because of that anxiety. I can't tell that person how to be motivated. That's a much more complicated thing. So motivation is a real a tickly one for me to start talking about. And as soon as I read this part of the question, he's always dreamed of writing a book, which is one thing. Selling a t-shirt, completely different thing. Making a board game, another planet altogether. Or getting an invention in front of the right person, that's another solar system. We all know people like this, and they've tried this and they tried that, and there's no follow through, or maybe they just lose steam or get interested in something else. If you try to get directly involved with this, I'm just going to come right out and say it, because I care for you as a person as much as I care for your dad. You're going to get absolutely bludgeoned by this because you're going to be trying to follow around a person that wants to do one thing on Tuesday, another thing next Friday. He's got something else on his mind on July. And if you try to be actively involved with this, it's going to pull you down. Okay. And so you need to avoid that. I'm just giving you straight talk here. You need to stay away from that. Now, does that mean you're a horrible person? No, because you're also going to be in there giving all the support and emotional love that you can. You're going to be talking about what a great board game that is until it turns into a t-shirt. And then you're going to be telling them what a great t-shirt that is.
Yep.
And here's the thing, and this is a hard one for me, so hopefully you do better than I do. What I'm going to tell you to do is don't give advice until you're asked. Okay. If he says, hey, son,
yeah.
tell me the best way to do this t-shirt, then you're going to give him what the experience that you've had. You might be able to point him in a few places. You're going to say this, you're going to say that, but you're not going to get directly involved until he invites you in, until he invites you into his creative process. You are a vampire. You stand out at the outside of the door, right? When he invites you in, then you come in and you can run all over the castle, but you're not going to give him advice until he asks for it. And then you're only going to give him advice. You're going to point him in directions. If he's not so good at websites like some of our fathers, maybe you print something out, or you offer, if he asks you, hey, could you upload this thing? Okay, you could do that for your dad. But you're not going to get directly involved until he asks you to get involved. And then, but up until then, you are going to be in full cheerleader mode. This is great. You're enthusiastic. It's awesome. But I think you've got to try, especially when I hear that, you say, well, I know this ends badly. Okay, so then practice self-care and set up some boundaries, right? And half the boundaries are ones that you set for yourself. Like, you're going to be very tempted to go running over and show him how to upload a t-shirt to Redbubble just to get his feet wet, right? Don't do that until he asks you to do it. Until then, it's all enthusiasm all the time. Great job. Keep going. And then if he asks you to get involved, then take baby steps towards that, because it sounds like by next Thursday, it's going to be a board game anyway. So don't get wrapped up in that, because you've got your own creative life to live too. And I think that's got to be, those are healthy boundaries. That doesn't make you a bad person. Those are healthy boundaries.
Yeah, it's funny because part of this, Brad, is I wholeheartedly agree with you that you don't get involved until asked. Sometimes with older people, because the world has changed so dramatically in the last 10 to 20 years, the way they knew and experienced how, for example, a t-shirt came in the world, or a book came in the world, or a piece of music came in the world, I can understand that this child's desire to share with their parent, like, no, now here's how you could do t-shirts. Now here's how you could do music. I can see how you would want to just broach the topic without even being asked, just so they're aware. I do get that. So I feel like that's a little different than stepping in and saying, I will upload to Redbubble for you. But to just say, hey, Redbubble exists. You know what I mean? Does that feel different to you, Brad, in terms of offering like what's potentially in the world, because someone in their 60s, 70s, whatever age it might be, might not know how to do certain things?
Yes, I agree with you. However, I'll put an asterisk in there and say they don't understand how that works. And they're also not going to understand that when they upload that thing to Redbubble, nobody's going to buy it for any number of reasons, right? Or, know, one person's going to buy it. And then the risk is they're going to blame you because they don't understand it. They're going to say, well, he told me to upload it to Redbubble and nobody's buying this thing. I knew that kid didn't know what he was doing.
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean? I mean, you and I know that when you upload something to Redbubble or any, we're not picking on Redbubble, any of these print-on-demand t-shirt places, when you upload your design to them, you're going to get a very limited response.
Right, because it should be the audience you're driving to Redbubble, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not Redbubble's job. Yeah, exactly.
And this guy could come up with a great t-shirt. It's probably not going to sell really well because there's a whole new complicated ecosystem out there that he's not aware of, that many of us listening to the show are not fully aware of. So my only fear there is that same amount of not understanding the world is going to be transferred over to when you show him the world. And then he says, well, some world, it don't work.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
So it's sticky. It's sticky. I say you're safer staying with the enthusiastic cheerleader routine.
I agree with you. I just want to reemphasize again, you are a good heart for wanting this for your parent, because we all have, myself included, we all have people in our life that we love them. We see the potential in them, but we also see the little bit of like Willy Loman and Death of a Salesman in them, and we're like, oh, this is hard to see someone who wants bigger, knows they deserve bigger, knows they're striving for bigger, but doesn't necessarily have the tools either in their life or within themselves to be able to fight for themselves, I guess is the right way to say it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so know that you have a good heart. This is a very tricky path that a lot of us walk. I do think the more I'm thinking about it, I think Brad has hit it on the head, is that you are a source of love and support. Especially in the midst of a tricky relationship, you're the source of love and support. And when things are done, you are the biggest cheerleader.
Yes.
And when questions are asked or resources are requested, then you jump in.
Yep.
But it is hard to try to fix something that another adult can't quite fix in themselves. You know, that it's hard, especially when it's a parent or a loved one or a relative or, it's just, it's hard. So know from Brad and I, you are a good person for wanting to do this. It's tricky. It's tricky is what I guess I'm saying.
You're a good person. You're a great person. You're among the best. To even be concerned about this, you're a good person. And the thing about it is, Dave, that's what I like about doing this show with you every week, is that we get to go out and do this show. We come in contact with so many good people. This is just one example. We've got thousands of them. So many good people. You know what makes them so good? The fact that they listen to this show and they're going to be here next week.
Oh, you rolled it into a conclusion.
Show.
To hell with you. To hell with you I was being sincere and you took it and you made it smarmy. And I'll tell you what else is a good person. Whoever's listening, we'll see you here next week.
That's right. That was my best transition yet. Are you kidding me?
I saw you doing it. I could feel my blood boiling as you turned kind sincerity into smarminess. And now I'm mad at you. Now I don't like you, Brad Geiger. I'm mad.
Well, in that case, maybe next week you won't be listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, who can turn a genuine moment into something that feels like it's Chase Bank marketing to you. He's the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my friend, the easily pissed off Dave Kellett, the overly sensitive co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com. And if he's not holding it hostage, Drive at drivecomic.com.
You know what it felt like? The transition felt like this. In these trying times, Chevy is here for you.
I was going for Jerry Lewis at 2 a.m. in the telethon where he...
Oh, I see. Yeah, we're going to look at the big board again, everyone. All right. The ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by our pal Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/in these trying times. Brad, I got to tell you, the one huge bummer about San Diego Comic-Con not having carpeting down this year is that I don't know what I will collapse upon on day 5 when the show wraps. I guess it's just cement. I guess I just collapse face down onto cement now. I don't have that half-inch carpet to stop my fall.
Is your neighbor still Dean Yeagle? You can collapse on him. Who's your neighbor? Do you know?
I've got, I used to have Disney, but Disney has 5 whatever gigantic. By the way, Disney made a big show. They're like, we're only going to do D23 from now on. Right. Nope, Disney's only doing D23. It's interesting. This year they have backtracked. Disney Publishing has a booth. Disney Comics has a booth. Disney Plus has a booth. Disney Studios has a booth. And I think Disney Video Games has a booth.
Oh my
God.
They
have gigantic booths. I have 5 booths down there. And so Disney used to be my neighbor. I no longer have them as a neighbor. I now have anime and manga statues as my neighbor.
No, then they'll have a body pillow for you to collapse on.
What do they call those? A waifu pillow or whatever?
Yeah, you don't have to worry. There will be plenty of those for there, and you just collapse on one of those.
I can join everybody else and just collapse onto those at the end of the day.
Yeah.